the outset, I thank MAPICON 2020, especially Dr. Vitul and team, for giving me an opportunity to speak on the subject and approach to a patient of quadriplegia, paraplegia. For any neurological disease, it is very important to understand what is the neuroanatomy. If the treating clinician knows the neuroanatomy, he will be able to reach the diagnosis in neurological disease. And for paraplegia and quadriplegia, we need to understand the neuroanatomy of the spinal cord. Spinal cord has meninges, which is protective sheath, which is dura mater, rachdine mater, and pia mater. There are potential spaces like subdural space, which is located between the dura and the arachnoid, and a subarachnoid space in which the CSF flows between the arachnoid and the pia mater. Further, the spinal cord starts at the foramen magnum and continues up to the as it terminates the lower down, and it is a continuation of medulla oblongata. It terminates as conus medullaris in the adults and at the lower border of L1, and in the young children at the lower border of the L3, and then it continues in the form of the phylum terminale, and that attaches to the spinal cord at the coccyx, and this phylum terminale is the prolongation of the pia mater, and the dural sac ends at the level of the second sacral vertebra. Further in the spinal cord anatomy, there is grey matter and then there is white matter, and in the grey matter there is ventral horn and then there is dorsal horn, and in the white matter there are anterior columns, there are lateral columns and the posterior columns, and various tracts are arranged in these columns, and we must have the understanding or knowledge of the position of various tracts, descending tracts in the spinal cord as well as ascending tracts in the spinal cord. If that knowledge is there, then it is very easy to reach to localize the site of lesion and to reach at the diagnosis, then it is very easy. And then we must have the knowledge of the dermatomes, especially if the patient has sensory features and these features are not symmetrical on both the sides. We must understand what are the various dermatomes so as to understand that which area of the nervous system or which area of the spinal cord is affected depending upon the dermatomal pattern. And then history taking. So it is very important to understand that how to take history, because history taking in a neurological case is very important. Before, as we start taking history, the clinician should have in his mind that there can be, this person may be fitting into various neurological syndromes, like this could be a demyelinating syndrome, this could be a degenerative syndrome, this could be a vascular episode, this could be an infective episode, this could be post-infective episode, this could be traumatic episode. So after the history, we should be able to put the patient into one or two of these syndromes so that during the examination of the nervous system, we are able to pinpoint on which syndrome this patient is fitting in. So in the history, it is very important how did the disease start. So this is very important. Whether it was sudden start, slow start, slowly and progressive, was there any recovery or not? That means how did it progress, whether there was any recovery or not. Then whether there was asymmetrical involvement or symmetrical involvement. Radicular pains were there or it is not there. Pain in the vertebral column is there or it is not there. Whether there is any band-like sensation or not. Spasms in the lower limbs or the upper limbs are there or they are not there. Bladder and bowel involvement is there or it is not there. Whether impotence is there and whether there are any deformities in the vertebral column. Further continuing in the history, we must ask history of backache, history of wasting of the muscles, history of numbness of the affected part, whether the perianal loss is, the sensory loss is there or it is not there, what is the gait of the patient, it is ataxic gait or what is the type of the gait, vaccination, is there any history of the recent vaccination, history of recent fever or exanthum before the start of this neurological problem, history of any radiation exposure in the recent or the long past, history of any toxic ingestion and history of any trauma. So this history will lead us to 1, 2 or 3 of these syndromes which we will further pinpoint on the examination of the nervous system. So when we move on to general physical examination, in addition to the routine general physical examination which we do in every patient, we should lay more stress on these things like neurofibromatosis. So whether the person is having neurofibromatosis, maybe there is neurofibromas, multiple neurofibromas on the body, and one of the neurofibroma is in the spinal cord, which is the cause of paraplegia or the quadriplegia. Similarly, lipomatosis, capsulate patches on the body, gibbous, spina bifida, whether it is overt or it is occulta. If it is occulta, then on examination, whether the tuft of hair is there in the lower back or not, whether there is a dimple over the skin of the lower back or not at the side of the spina bifida, and then in the examination, cutaneous vascular nevi are there or they are not there, because if they are cutaneous vascular, some of the angiometas may be in the spinal cord and they may be leading to the picture of the myelopathy. As far as CNS examination is concerned, we will concentrate on all the systems, is pyramidal system, cerebellar system, extrapyramidal system. So as far as pyramidal system is concerned, we should look for in the motor system tone, power and reflexes, and in the sensory system, superficial sensory system and the deep sensory system. Then in the cerebellar features, Romberg sign, that is positive or it is not positive, what is the gait of the patient, bladder and bowel involvement is there or it is not there, and then in the end the examination of the vertebral column, like for the spina bifida occulta, or for any scoliosis, kyphosis, or for any gibbous, any tenderness. So all these things must be looked for in the examination of the vertebral column. As far as the investigations are concerned, in addition to the cause which we will be seeing, what are the causes, in addition to those we will go for the X-ray of the spine, CT scan, MRI scan of the spine, and the CSF examination where it is indicated. How to localize the lesion when the person is suffering from quadriplegia or having the paraplegia, how to localize the lesion. So for the localization of the lesion, it is the sensory level which helps us, and in the thorax it is only and only the sensory level which helps us. Then atrophy of the muscles, except the small muscles of the hand in quadriplegia. So person is having quadriplegia, and the atrophy is an important element, important part of the examination to indicate what is the lesion, the level of the lesion. But small muscle atrophy of the small muscles of the hand should not be included for localization of the lesion, because it is mostly misleading, as there may be lesion may be in the higher cord and there may be congestion at C8T1, and that may be causing wasting of small muscles of the hand, and that will be erroneously we will be making the diagnosis at the level of C7, C8 or T1. Actually the lesion is in the high cord. So small muscle, that atrophy, that shouldn't be taken into account. Then loss of reflexes. So at the level there will be loss of the reflexes will be there, and then abdominal reflexes, we will look for the Beaver sign. Then other reflexes like cremasteric reflex, bulbocorneus reflex. Cremasteric means level of lesion is L1, bulbocorneus S2, 3 and 4, and inner reflex S4 and 5. Then how to localize the vertebra, that what is the site of the lesion. For the cervical vertebra we add 1, between T1 and T6 we add 2, means if it is T1 vertebral level, it will be T3 spinal level. So for cervical we add 1, T1 to T6 we add 2, T7 to T9 we add 3, T10 corresponds to L1 and L2 spinal segments, T11 vertebra, that corresponds to L3 and 4 spinal segments, T12 corresponds to L5 segment, and L1 corresponds to the sacrooccipital segments. Now coming to myelopathies. The myelopathies can be of the two types. These can be compressive myelopathies, these can be non-compressive myelopathies. Further, compressive myelopathy is divided into whether it is intramedullary compression or it is extramedullary compression. And further extramedullary compression is divided into whether it is intradural extramedullary or it is extradural extramedullary. Now, how to differentiate between the compressive myelopathy and non-compressive myelopathy? The radicular pains are present in the compressive myelopathy, they are not present in the non-compressive myelopathy. Vertebral pains are present in the compressive myelopathy, they are absent, but occasionally in myelitis like multiple sclerosis or transverse myelitis, these may be present in the non-compressive causes also. Bladder involvement is early in the compressive and late in the non-compressive, and family history is usually negative in the compressive and it is generally positive in the non-compressive. There is no selectivity of the tracts in compressive myelopathy, but the selectivity of tracts may be there in the non-compressive myelopathy. If as far as symmetry is concerned, compressive, if it is extradural, it is purely symmetrical. If it is intradural, it is asymmetrical. But non-compressive myelopathy is usually asymmetrical. Self-improvement. In compressive myelopathy, there is no improvement unless the treatment may be in the form of bed rest, traction or surgery. When it is given, then there is no improvement without this, but self-improvement may be there in the non-compressive myelopathy. Then gibbous may be there in the compressive myelopathy, it is not there in the non-compressive myelopathy. There may be tenderness in the compressive, which is not there in the non-compressive. Then spina bifida occulta may be there in the compressive myelopathy, it is not there in the non-compressive. Neurofibromatosis and lipomatosis may be there in the compressive myelopathy, these may not be there in the non-compressive myelopathy. Now, how to differentiate between extramedullary compression and intramedullary compression? As far as pains are concerned, the spontaneous pains are severe, early and of radicular type in the extramedullary compression. They are not severe, they are ill-defined and they are of burning type in the intramedullary compression. Backache is usually present in the extramedullary compression, which is absent in the intramedullary compression. Bladder involvement is late in the extramedullary compression and it is early in the intramedullary compression. As far as sensory system is concerned, extradural is purely symmetrical and intradural has picture of the brown sequoia like. And in the intramedullary compression, it is asymmetric and dissociated type of the sensory loss is there. Sacral sparing is absent in the extramedullary, it is present in the intramedullary compression. Lower motor neuron signs are minimal and segmental in the extramedullary, but they are widespread and atrophy is quite dominant in the intramedullary compression. Upper motor neuron signs are early in the extramedullary, they are late in the intramedullary. Trophic changes are less in the extramedullary, more in the intramedullary. Spinal deformity is present in the extra, it is absent in the intramedullary, and CS proteins are raised in the extramedullary, they are normal in the intramedullary compression. Now, how to differentiate between extradural extramedullary and intradural extramedullary compression? Radicular pains are bilateral in extradural extramedullary compression, they are unilateral and most severe in the intramedullary compression. This extradural compression is absolutely symmetrical, but intradural can be asymmetrical. CSF proteins are minimally raised in the extradural, but they are maximally raised in the intradural extramedullary compression, and gibbous may be there in the extradural, it is not there in the intradural. Now, what are the causes of the compressive myelopathy? There can be bony causes like degenerative causes, spondylosis, PIBD, fluorosis, Paget's disease. There may be primary of the bone like osteoma and osteosarcoma, secondaries from breast, bronchus, bowel, thyroid, prostate and kidney. They can be inflammatory causes like tuberculosis, syphilis and pyogenic osteomyelitis. It can be traumatic like vertebral fracture or the disc prolapse. Then there can be epidural space causes of compressive myelopathy like abscess in the epidural space, hematoma, cyst, leukemia and lymphoma deposits. Then there can be duramater causes like syphilitic pachymeningitis. Then intradural causes of compressive myelopathy like arachnoid cyst. Then there can be arachnoiditis and there can be infiltrations like leukemia and lymphoma deposits. There can be tumors like neurofibromas, meningiomas, lipomas, chondromas and the dermoid cyst. Now, intramedullary causes of the compression can be inflammatory like metastatic abscess, infiltrations like leukemia and lymphoma deposits, primaries like ependymomas and nerve cell tumors, secondaries from any side, vascular causes like AV malformation and hematomyelin, and degenerative causes like syringomyelia. Now, the causes of the, what are the causes of the non-compressive myelopathy? These can be infective causes, and under the infective causes, these can be infections, viral infections like CMV, HIV, polio, herpes, or it can be infective causes like schistosomiasis, toxoplasmosma. It can be post-infective like post-viral infection, immune reactions, or it can be post-vaccinal after the vaccination. These can be degenerative causes of non-compressive myelopathy like ataxia, motor neuron disease, and spinal muscular atrophy. Demyelinating causes like multiple sclerosis, neuromyelitis optica, deficiency diseases like SSCD of the cord, and toxins like letharism, ginger paralysis, or tropical spinal ataxia due to cyanide poisoning. It can be vascular causes like infarction due to spinal artery thrombosis or embolism, and this can be because of the radiation myelitis. Now, what are the differences between cauda equina and conus medullaris lesions in the lower spine? So, as we take the history, spontaneous pains are very severe. They are classical root pains and can occur anywhere in the cauda equina. But in the conus medullaris, spontaneous pains are not severe. They are ill-defined. They are symmetrical in perineum and thighs. Means it is symmetrical saddle in conus medullaris. It is asymmetrical saddle in the cauda equina lesions. Bladder development is late in the cauda but is early in the conus medullaris lesions. Impotence is late in the cauda equina lesions and it is early in the conus medullaris lesions. Sensory changes are in both. There is saddle but is asymmetrical saddle in cauda equina. It is symmetrical saddle in the conus medullaris lesions. It is pansensory in cauda equina and it is dissociated and severe in conus medullaris. As far as motor changes are concerned, there is marked wasting, widespread wasting, and fasciculations are less in cauda, but there is minimal wasting, segmental wasting, and fasciculations are more in conus. Both knee and ankle they are lost in cauda, but knee reflex is spared in conus. Bulbocornus and inner flex are involved in cauda, they are spared in conus, and plantar is flexor in cauda and it is extensor in conus. And this is the only plantar in the neurology which is not explained why it is extensor in the conus medullaris regions, and trophic regions are less and late in the cauda and early and marked in the cauda. Then there can be cerebral causes of the paraplegia. These can be venous sinus thrombosis, tumors and trauma of the precentral gyri in parasagittal position, thrombosis of congenital single anterior cerebral artery, thrombosis of bilateral anterior cerebral artery, infantile diplegia, cerebral diplegia, and hepatic paraplegia, or what is called hepatic myelopathy because of loss of red cells in the frontal lobes. So this was all about these. Now the carry home message which we must remember when we are going to examine these patients. Knowledge of the neuroanatomy is very important for the diagnosis of neurological pains. Detailed history taking and neurological examination is of utmost importance. Patient may be in the spinal shock at presentation and the clinical picture may be confusing. The basic rule in the spinal lesion is lower motor neuron features at the level and upper motor neuron features below the level of the lesion. In thorax, only the sensory system helps us to localize the lesion, and abdominal reflexes form an important part of the examination in the lesions at the level of the abdomen, and as we move down the spinal cord, bladder involvement is more common. So I finish my talk here. Thank you.